You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskins, your host as always. This week we have another huge hitter in the industry. It's one I probably should have got into the studio a good 12 months ago, but now is still a very pertinent time. We have John Gelavis, Executive Director of the Master Builders Association, in the room today. What an exciting episode this is for me, and what an interesting time it is to have the top dog in the building industry come in. Mate, you're an advocate for a lot of people in a lot of precarious times right now. John, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Trent. Really great to be with you, mate.
Tell you what, your job has not been easy the last 3 years, has it?
No, it hasn't. I was only sort of speaking to the media recently about challenges that we've been facing, and through everything right at the start of the COVID pandemic, I never thought that I'd be having conversations with our members around medical procedures such as vaccination. So it's been a whirlwind period for the industry since the Delta variant impacted on the industry back in the early part of 2020. And since then, our focus has really been trying to keep the industry operational, which we've been extremely successful in doing. But of course, no one expected the issues that we've seen recently with the massive levels of cost escalation and challenges around trade supply and trade pricing. So it's been a tough time for the industry for sure.
Look, you bring up a lot of issues there, and we'll go over them all today. But in a way, as executive director, you sign up for everything, right? But in another way, you sort of don't sign up for leading your industry through a pandemic, do you?
No, you don't. It was probably one of the last thing I thought that I would be actually doing. And I know the term unprecedented has been used a hell of a lot in recent times, but again, I never thought I'd be, I guess, advocating around some of the things that we have been. And I think credit goes to a lot of people within our industry, how they've been able to remain operational and keep their staff employed and keep going, but also the people that are involved from the medical side and the hospitals, and everyone's been involved in the process should tip their hat to them, because they've been really those frontline workers have done such a great job. But it's been a tough time.
At the end of the day, you guys are not trained for this. You have not got, I'm sure, as part of being an executive director, you are not trained to manage your industry through a pandemic, to deal with all these health sides of things, the policy that comes out. I think the industry did very, very well, especially in Western Australia, to be able to just kick on. And would it be fair to say you guys had a bit of a hall pass just to get on with it, because we needed someone working in the state at the time?
Well, I think you're right. We're in our 125th year as an association. You know, we were established in 1898, and during that time, we'd seen a couple of world wars that we'd been through, and this pandemic sort of, without doubt, came out of left field. And I guess in many cases, the challenges have come thick and fast for the industry since that happened. So, but we've been resilient enough to get through that period. But I think when it did happen at the start of the pandemic, the display homes were effectively shut down, and we were coming out of probably one of the worst periods in the state's housing history, because we'd gone from a housing boom in 2014 of about 32,000 commencements, and we were sitting around about the 15,000 at 2019, 2020. And then when the display homes were shut down, there was real concern at the time around what does that pipeline of work look like? And you could probably put a circle around November, December to say we're effectively going to run out of work. And I think that's really where the state government understood the contribution that the building construction industry makes to the state economy, along with the mining sector. And at the time, the feedback we'd got that they wanted to keep the construction industry operational. Of course, we had to work within the COVID-19 protocols. And
it's not easy though, is it? At the end of the day, I'm imagining you've got most people on site. They're not following the same rules people are following in an office. They're sort of just getting on with it. They're outside. They're carrying a lot of dangerous equipment. How many of these guys are rolling around with masks all day, surely?
It was very difficult at the time, because there were, the government was looking to introduce fines and penalties for people that weren't complying. An example was the collection of vaccination certificates was another one that we had to work with the government on, to say, well, it's not really, in many cases, very difficult for a head contractor to collect everybody's vaccination certificate. So there are a lot of challenges.
All social distancing, right?
Absolutely.
Steve, I need you to help me carry this fridge.
That's right.
How do you social distance in that situation?
The issues around mask wearing in the heat of, in the height of summer. So, without doubt, there are loads of challenges and hygiene, cleanliness on sites, but also you've got your normal site safety that needed to be managed, cleaning out crib rooms and site sheds, and all those areas needed to be managed. And as you mentioned, social distancing. So the ability of the industry to respond the way they did was amazing, considering the nature of the industry. And credit goes to a lot of our members that worked really hard during that time to remain operational, but also continue to build homes, continue to build infrastructure that the government needed, particularly the Capital Works program that was pretty significant at the time. So it was a desire of the government to keep the industry operational because it's a $30 billion sector, employs 10% of the state's workforce, a majority of apprentices. For every dollar invested, there's a $3 multiplier. So it was really keeping people in jobs, sustaining the state economy, and making sure that the state continued to be not just operational, but also keep the economy running. And not just the state economy, the metro economy, the local economy, regional. And it's not just the builder that's contributing, it's the trade contractor, it's the supplier, the ancillary,
everywhere down the value chain.
From the tradie buying the pie and the chopped milk on the way to work, everyone benefits from a strong building construction industry.
The settlements industry does, the mortgage broking industry does, the sales industry does. Everyone involved in property benefits from construction.
That's right. And I think that's really exactly what the state government were trying to do. And I guess that very much the mining sector is a big economic contributor to the state, but many to a degree that the construction industry can sometimes fly under the radar.
The construction industry is actually bigger when you think about the people employed. Let's talk about you for a minute, John. We've got so much to consume and so much to talk about in the construction industry, but I want to spend 5-10 minutes talking about you, just like we do with a lot of our leaders, because one day someone will be you, and I'd like them to have that confidence of how they can get there and the fact that they can as well. You've spent 5 years with the MBA. You spent 6 with the HIA before that in the same role, essentially. Can you give us a little bit of a story of what it was like for John Gelavis, 18-year-old kid coming out of school, that pathway to where you are today?
I guess in many ways I was probably born to be involved in the building industry. I love the industry.
In the family?
Yeah. My father worked for Bunnings Forest Products then as a major accounts executive, looking after a lot of the volume builders through the 70s and 80s. So a lot of our conversations around the dining room table were about builders and what was going on in the industry, and timber was a massive part of the industry very much at the time, and more so today. So and probably we're using more pine back in those days, more carry and jarrah. I guess my initial sort of start as I left high school was to work for Bunnings Forest Products on Adelaide Terrace originally, and then worked at Bunnings Forest Products in the trade side. I was pulling roof orders in the carry yard at Bunnings, and did that for a while, and then went on the road for Bunnings, working with a lot of the furniture manufacturers. But I'd play cricket, so I went to England for about 12 months as an overseas amateur for a club over there, and I played cricket for Scarborough Cricket Club here for many years, and so that was a bit of a break. And then I came back working for Bunnings again when I returned in the early part of the 1990s, and it was still in my blood. And then I was lucky enough to take on a role with CSR, a brand called Formica that was pretty strong at the time, which is Laminex, and moved to Melbourne, and the Laminex acquired the Formica brand then, and so I was with Laminex for close to 15 years in a range of different roles.
And for everyone listening, that product is essentially everything that you get from your cupboard doors, a lot of your bench tops, that's all Laminex.
Now they've got a strong product with engineered stone and a lot of decorative surfaces, so the Laminex brand's an iconic brand within the country. So it was great to work there, and then when I came back in the early part of 2003, I got involved with the Housing Industry Association on their regional executive committee, and then I served as president for about a year or so, and then became the executive director in around 2011. Great organisation, and it was a real pleasure to lead Housing Industry Association and their and the members there, particularly focused around a lot of the challenges that were evident at the time. And then the move to MBA came, the Master Builders Association came in 2018, and that was an opportunity to work not just in the residential space but also the commercial building space, which in many cases are a little bit different.
More aligned to your background as well?
Well, yeah, a bit of both. I mean, what we're finding is a lot of the issues tend to be a little bit merging, but the commercial construction industry deals with a range of different issues, a little bit different to specifically around housing. The commercial construction deals heavily in industrial relations space, and it's certainly a different model. It's dealing with business to business as opposed to the housing sector, which deals
B2C.
B2C.
Yeah. But how is your day-to-day job different between, well, firstly, if I can ask, what is your day-to-day job? What does it look like these days? Is it a lot of advocacy? Is it a lot of meeting people and learning and then consuming and passing that on to government? How was it different this 5 years versus the 5 years before at HIA?
Oh, well, I think when you factor in COVID, it's been intense. I mean, you're really working just about every day of the week. In a lot of cases, through the COVID pandemic, the government were making a lot of announcements over the weekend, particularly with the stimulus announcement. The lockdown almost seemed to be every weekend. The Premier was making an announcement. So we'd be working, the Master Builders team would be working with myself and the Premier's staff and ministers and others to try and get the message out to our members about what those changes meant for the industry, and to make sure that we were getting that information to them in the quickest period of time so they could make decisions. I mean, the whole concept of the lockdown was how it all occurred on a Sunday, but we had to get information to the members Sunday night to make sure they knew they could be on site operating on Monday, because it was all new territory for everyone. So a lot of my time is spent working with the members, with our board and our councils and our committees to make sure our policy works right, then working with the government to ensure that our voice is heard from an industry perspective and the policies they're developing would work for the industry. So a lot of time spent there, a lot of time spent working with the members behind the scenes, and also running the operations of Master Builders. So we have a range of different, what we effectively call service units to our members. We have an online eDocs platform for contracts. We have a large events and awards program that we roll out. We have Master Builders insurance brokers where members engage with Master Builders for their insurance services. We're a registered training organisation, so we deliver industry-based training for the industry. So there's a lot more than advocacy. There's a lot more than advocacy. We've got, I guess, the commercial side of Master Builders, which is very much as a not-for-profit and in many ways supporting our members with services to make sure they can operate effectively and they get the support they need. The advocacy side is really important, particularly for the small to medium members who need to have a voice to make sure that their voice is heard around a range of different areas. The vaccine mandate was one example of that. The support that we provide them is absolutely crucial. They're probably the two areas. Governance is really critical for the association, so working with our board and our councils to make sure we're working in line with our constitution and we're operating effectively as an association. So there's a range of different elements to the role, but it's a role that never sleeps because you're always available for the media. You know, we've seen in recent times a lot of articles in the West and appearances on commercial television, radio, responding where we need to and where we can to issues that are affecting the industry. So it's a constant. It's a role that never stops.
Well, let's segue into those issues. Maybe we can talk chronologically about this. So I remember having a conversation in mid-2020, just after the building grants had been announced, with Cameron Lade, who was the general manager of Dale Alcock's residential back then. He's obviously moved on since then, but I remember sitting down with him and chatting about what was going on, and he said, Trent, to be frank, we were definitely on a recovery path before these grants came in, despite COVID.
Yes.
We were picking up quite well. The industry was looking positive going forward. We really didn't need both grants at the same time, and this has really started to choke us. That was back in 2020. And I wrote an article on the West back then talking about, I think it was in July, forecasting and discussing that this industry does not have the admin staff, the contract space, the drafties, and then the tradies to do all of this work. And what's going to happen is prices, and prices hadn't risen at that point yet, but the 40 to 60 grand being thrown at people at the time will be more than consumed by price rises. And lo and behold, that is exactly what has happened. So that those grants have essentially been totally eradicated by price rises, some of which that are global factors, but a lot of which that are local factors as well. Did you get that feeling yourself at the time? Were you consulted by Mark McGowan and his team at the time? Were you excited about having a state grant as well? And regardless of whether you were or weren't, looking back, was it a good idea?
This has sort of gone around in my mind for a long period of time now around
where
we are now. I think when I look back to that period of time in the early part of 2020, I mentioned before we were at 32,000 housing commencements in around 2014. So we come off the largest construction, was a mining and construction boom. It was a combination, and 32,000 is the highest in the history of since we've been collecting the data. But then from 2014 leading into 2019, the market had come off by over 60%. So every single year it was in decline.
Builders are on their knees.
And I think also to remember that the workforce side is a critical aspect to consider here, because at the time we had strong overseas migration, strong interstate migration. that was supporting the 32,000 housings, plus the commercial construction that was going on at the time. So we'd seen that come down, and as you mentioned with Cameron, what he was saying was correct, is that the market was probably starting to recover from that low level. And 15,000 housing commencements is extremely low. I mean, our long run average is about 20,000. So to be at 15
we're already in a deficit.
We're terrible.
I would say soaking up a lot of the oversupply at the same time.
Yeah. The green shoots were there in the early part of 2020. But then when COVID hit, and you remember back then what was going on with just something like toilet paper on supermarket shelves. I mean, there was pandemonium at the time. No one knew what the COVID-19 pandemic was going to hold. No one knew where it was going to end. And I think people were starting to panic buy. And I remember back at the time, there was a lot of nervousness. So we were reporting every day. The Premier was making press conferences every day, updating everybody on on how many cases that we'd had. So there was a lot of stress, I think, in the community, naturally. But I think one of the key things that happened, if you look at it, we were coming off these really low levels, extreme levels of building activity or housing activity. And then there was a decision to shut down display homes. And that's effectively the shop front of the industry. It's the retail part of the industry. So you've got your lowest levels. Admittedly, there might have been some green shoots, as Cameron pointed out to you. But then the display homes were shut, which means no demand and no end in sight about when display homes would actually open.
So there's fear.
So there was fear. Okay, so if you look at retailing, those builders at the time saying, okay, well, we're in 3 or 4 months' time, if there is no further work, well, then
the industry falls apart.
And the cliff is coming. So, but I think that the federal government announcing its home builder scheme first, the 25,000, and it was means tested.
Should that have been enough?
It could have been enough in terms of when you look at the 25 plus we already had a $10,000 first homeowner grant and stamp duty exemptions for first home buyers. Obviously, there's different support mechanisms around banks and Keystart and these other fundamental support mechanisms for first home buyers. And we're very much exposed to first home buyers. The $20,000 builder bonus was the next one that came and that got announced at the same time. And like I said at the time, is that's going to effectively turbocharge the industry, which it did, because when you add the builder bonus with the home builder bonus and the other elements, it was close to $70,000 worth of stimulus.
That's right.
Yeah.
I've heard that they didn't even talk to each other. Liberal federal government, Labor state government, one didn't know what the other was doing, and by the time that the Liberal government had announced theirs, state government was too far along to pull out, regardless of whether they would have wanted to anyway. But that they didn't actually talk to each other at all and weren't aware that this was going on. And it all just happened at the same time within, I think, 5 days of each other, as if it looked like it was coordinated, but it actually wasn't. That scares me a little bit as well.
What I felt at the time is that every government around the country, I think, and around the world, were trying to use construction as a way to prop up their economy. I think that they felt that construction and certainly mining were the two areas that needed to keep going if those fell apart. So I think there was best of intention that the government support those industries they know will help their local economies. Where we're at now, and certainly over the last 12 to 18 months, I think it was very hard no one expected to see the levels of cost escalation, the challenge around global supply chain issues. We even had a wharf strike. We had natural disasters like we saw with Seroja and the Wooroloo bushfires. And so there was a lot happening at the time. We had the war in the Ukraine where we do get supply of LVLs, so for roof timber components. So there was a lot of factors going on. Those global supply chain issues really impacted the industry.
Well, they still do.
Well, they still do. The other thing to remember, if I go back to 2014, that I mentioned around, we had strong overseas migration, we had strong interstate migration because those other states, like New South Wales, were quiet. So we had trades coming over to help with that construction period, where in WA we had the border closure. So we had no interstate migration. We had no overseas migration either.
The state should have recognised that if you stimulate an industry that much that has got that low of a base of trades in the first place, already being absolutely sucked out by the mining industry at the time as well, highest level of apprenticeship cancellations in the state coming from the construction industry too, and you've got the borders closed, where are you going to get the people to do this work? And you can see they didn't recognise that because they've now pushed out the expiry dates of these slab down grants 2 years longer than they thought it was going to be. And there's probably still going to be some people caught out in June this year, still not having those slabs down from when they signed December 2020. How long before they announced it were you guys aware it was going to happen? I'm assuming you guys at the time were supportive of it.
Oh, look, I think at the time, we were certainly at the time when the Delta variant hit, we were concerned about the cliff, and we were concerned that the industry would run out of work. And builders were telling us, members around the country were telling us that in 3 or 4 months' time that they were concerned about their pipeline of work. And that's why we were saying to government, something needs to happen to support the industry, because we can't afford to have mum and dad builders, and particularly those small to medium businesses, wind their business up because there was no work. And as I mentioned before, there was a high degree of stress around the country around where the COVID pandemic was going to end. I think that's really where government's mind was at the time. So naturally, we were concerned around the workforce and the apprentices and all those affected for the sake of the industry. So I think in hindsight, governments may have sort of made different decisions, but what we didn't expect was the challenges around the supply materials, but the cost escalation's been unbelievable.
Well, let's talk about cost escalation. What would you pin the number at as a percentage now? Is it 40%, 45, 50% in the residential market?
Oh, it's starting to ease a little bit, but I think overall it's around about the 30% when you average it all out. But what we've seen is some real critical building materials go up significantly, if you can get it. Cite pine as one of the classic examples, where I know we're very much had predominantly been a double brick type of market, but we use pine, roof carpenters use pine, pitch roofs, wall frames.
Not that much easier to get as well.
That's right. But we had to, one of the examples of our advocacy was that we had to call a meeting with the Premier and the Forestry Minister, Dave Kelly, to say we need more logs out of the forest to get to West Pine to be able to process
what did they say?
Structural timber. And we were successful. We got another 13,000 tonne of logs out of forest to be able to supply to West Pine to produce more timber. But that were the dire, I guess, consequences that we were being faced with. And where that puts the builder, if builder's got a roof carpentry team ready to pitch a roof on one day, but then the timber was lined up to be the previous day, and it couldn't be delivered for whatever reason.
You're out for weeks.
Couldn't get the LVLs, months.
Yeah. I saw that so many times on site where builders said, mate, the roofing guys are ready for Wednesday. Timber's supposed to be arriving on Tuesday. Timber doesn't arrive on Tuesday. Maybe it arrives 3 days later or 4 weeks later. Regardless, that roofing carpenter's off to the next 5 jobs before he comes back.
Correct.
And you're out for 3-4 months as a client waiting because of that small shift. Whereas back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, even 3 or 4 years ago, tradies would push things left and right a couple of days. Timber always arrived on time, and things would track along with a lot of certainty on time frames.
Oh, that's right.
There's a lot more flexibility in the market.
Yeah, and what I've been saying publicly is certainly what's caused a lot of the challenges at the moment for a lot of residential builders and commercial builders. We're talking more residential now, but it's become a cost and cash flow crunch because, as we know, there's progress payments along the way for builders. And if there's a delay in, say, getting to plate height, then they can't get a progress payment. If there's a delay for whatever reason, that's the cash flow crunch. They're being hit on many different fronts with the supply materials, the supply of trades, the trade contractor pricing, and then the material pricing. But those delays impact cash flow. And that's the unprecedented aspect of it. Stimulus or not, the delays in materials, it has been very, very hard for the industry. It's really effectively been the meat and the sandwich because the longer the delays, and that impacts on cash flow and that impacts on those businesses being able to run effectively and efficiently.
Well, let's talk about pricing and cash flow a bit more. I think it's pretty obvious to most people that this boom has been a profitless boom. We saw in the newspaper, Dal Alcock, fella's got plenty of money, but he lost $45 million last year in his businesses or in the ABN group. That's not a small amount of money, even for a guy with his pockets. That would therefore be scaled down across every other builder in Perth. I doubt there was a builder in Perth last year who actually turned a profit. That's pretty scary for an industry in the first place. We don't want that. Whilst we are transactional in the industry, everyone needs to be doing well for that to actually be an industry in the first place.
Correct.
Think about clients that had signed on in May and just started their build in June. Contract's been signed, it's not changing. Those guys finishing a year or so later, maybe a year and a half later, that contract was for $500,000, meaning they're probably going to cost the builder $400, $420 maybe at the time. It actually probably ended up costing the builder more than the contract price. So they're losing money just to finish jobs. Yeah. That's still happening today. And you look at a lot of those builders that are now falling over. We saw the WA Home Group, I think it was called, Individual Developments, New Sensations was the first to go. He was demonised in the newspaper, which is horrible. You know, this is a guy who's just trying to get on with work. You see Hamlin Homes this week fall over. There's a couple of themes there I want to talk about with you.
Yep.
The first one is I think a lot of them bit off more than they could chew at the time. You see the big guys, Firm, Pindan falling down, even Clough on a commercial level, right? But another huge theme, most of these guys were involved with government work. Can you explain what's going on there?
Well, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And again, I don't know the individual financial positions of any of those organisations you've spoken of.
All of them are members of yours, I'm sure.
Many of them. And I think really what we've sort of been talking to the government about, the concerns we have around a couple of areas, particularly around contracts. And we've released a building industry reform package with 18 recommendations to government, and I'm happy to provide you a copy, and if you wanted to make that available, it's in the public domain. It's on our Master Builders website, mbawa.com. But it talks about a couple of areas that need to be addressed, and we want government to lead this process. We have been concerned for some time that the balance of risk in procurement has been pushed heavily down towards the head contractor. And that head contractor risk it may have been able to be to bear in previous years, but right now it's just not feasible. It's not sustainable. So what we're saying then is that the contracts move away from standard Australian contracts to more standard contracts that have been amended to pass risk down, and that's really concerning us. When you couple that with procurement approaches of lowest price wins, it puts the head contractor in a really precarious position. We've been saying to government, and I've had meetings with the Premier's office. I've met with the previous Minister of Finance, Tony Booty, and I've had meetings with the current Minister, Sue Ellery, regarding that, and as our association has, around how do we get the government to lead in a couple of areas, making sure that the contracts are ensuring that they're equitable, but also procuring on value rather than lowest price, and taking into account value around the life cycle of the project rather than a very much a cost-based approach. So we want the government to lead on those. With some of our reforms are about how do we create a more sustainable industry, not just for, we've got certainly the development industry, but the head contractor, the subcontractors, the suppliers, the workers. Everyone across the board will benefit from a sustainable industry. We think if it's effectively a once-in-a-generational opportunity to make real reform. And we're not the only, I guess, organisation around the country that's calling for reforms, but this particular reform package we've developed has been done in conjunction with our members, our Construction Council, and these are tangible reforms that we hope will be able to get supported by the government.
Is the big theme moving away from fixed price contracts and having some level of cost plus variation there, where the risk downwards is of benefit to both parties, but the risk upwards is of obligation to both parties as well?
Yeah, it is. I think one of the big issues that we've seen with the industry, housing and commercial construction, has been the cost escalation. And as you heard from me at the start, I've worked on the supply side of the industry. So I know that when you generally talk to a builder about price increases, they're generally either around CPI or there's something particular that's happened where you're asking for an increase and you're justifying those increases as you're going. What we've seen with COVID pandemic and the cost escalation, these have come at a rapid rate of knots, and they're double digits. And I'll be getting the invoices from our members, 10%,
I see them, they
10%,
send them to me.
10%.
It's a one-page letter. Hi, XYZ.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our supply chain has gone up to a level we can't sustain. From the 1st of January, we'll be passing on an increase of 43% for door lintels.
Yeah.
Kind regards, Steve.
Yeah.
And you've already signed your fixed price contract 4 months ago. You haven't procured the lintels yet, but you plan to. You thought it was going to cost you $3,000. Now it's going to cost you $4,500.
Yeah. Yep, and that's what we've been saying right through the pandemic. I mean, we've seen the supply chain continue to increase the prices at a rate of knots. So that's where that cost and cash flow crunch I was talking about. So that cash flow delay has been associated with the challenge around passing the delays in getting to your progress payments, but the cost side has been significant. Like pine's gone up well over 100%, close to 200%. Steel, installation, it's just been one product and service after the next. And the builders effectively the meat, the sandwich. Very difficult to pass those costs on.
Well, impossible
to pass those costs on under those contracts. So, and what we're saying to government is many cases that we need the cost to be passed on maybe even existing government contracts. So one of our advocacy sides, Trent, that been really important, and part of you get back to what I do day to day, is constantly on behalf of our members in the government's ear about things that they need to do to help the industry. And one, prior to the state budget that was announced last year, was We put 17 recommendations to government in correspondence about what needs to happen. One of them in particular was rise and fall clauses for government contracts. And we're pleased to say that they've supported that.
Well,
with
they
these
need to.
Well, they have to. The other part is they announced a $30 million stabilisation package. That stabilisation package allows for commercial builders that have done projects within a period of time to be able to apply to the government for cost escalation relief. Cost recovery.
Yeah.
So that $30 million was really important. As much as we'd like to see more in that bucket, that was, the start of that process where some of those commercial builders and doing work for the government, where they could go back and say, if they could demonstrate the cost escalation and present that to government, that there would be consideration to give them cost relief.
And how's
which
it
is
been going?
Critical. I think at the moment we would like to see a shorter period of time in from application to response.
Yeah.
We don't think that at this stage we think it could go a little bit better than where it's going. We just think that the feedback we're getting from members is the process could be sped up in many ways. So it's a critical aspect of our advocacy.
Do you think a few of these builders that went under, if they'd received that support in a timely manner, would not have gone under? Again, most of them.
It would have I think it would have certainly helped.
Oh,
I think it would have certainly helped. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of these guys are residential/commercial builders with involvement with a couple of big projects with the government, which has been the big pinch that has sent them under from a cash flow point of view, because the government, even with their $5 billion surplus, was unwilling to move. Even when Blind Freddie could see that these builders were not only not making a dollar, but were actually losing money just finishing these projects.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to communicate to government at the time, is that the industry needs help. The industry needs support, because, again, I use the term, I know it's been bloody overused, but it was just completely unprecedented how to respond and react in these. And as it's placed enormous pressure on our builder members, our subcontractors. In many cases, some builders are subcontracting to head contractors, so it affects the whole supply chain. It affects lives, livelihoods, and the mental health side is one we haven't touched on. But there's been issues right around the country with the mental health of our industry.
Well, the anxiety of a lot of these builders and subcontractors, knowing that they're 1 week away or 2 weeks away from bankruptcy at any point in time. That's not a position any business owner wants to be in. The other side of the coin is financing. It's all well and good to have the developer, state government or private, and the builder agree, let's do a cost plus arrangement, or my suggestion would be a cost plus arrangement with a contingency cap on the upside, where you benefit from the downside, but at least there's fat there on the upside. So if we can prove it, those costs get passed on to a limit. But we can blame the government for this, but really the key engineers of this lack of flexibility in the commercial space of these arrangements have been the big four banks. They don't work with cost plus arrangements. They enforce fixed price contracts. They are the architects. If you really look at it, the banks are the architects of this risk. Yeah, well, again, Trent, I think that's really the part of our advocacy. So when we're talking to government, we're talking to banks, we're talking to all the stakeholders, the development industry, the property council we're meeting with soon, the architects associations, we've met with them, even the CFMEU. We'll talk to anyone that can help us with supporting these reforms, because they're going to help everybody. I agree with you. The finance side is critical to this process. Banks have to be on board. We'll be meeting with them shortly. When you talk about procurement models, there's a range of different models that could be considered. There's early contractor involvement, there's construction management contracts, and as you mentioned, cost plus. So there's a range of different contracting models that could be considered. But the one that the process at the moment is fixed price contract. Very much procurement is based on price rather than value. It's a race to the bottom, and we've got to try and get out of that cycle. The industry has to be sustainable in the long term for everyone. It is just as important as some of the elements that the government have introduced about how to keep the industry operational, but it has to be operational, but it has to be sustainable. Apprentices is a massive part of, we train a lot of apprentices. Do we have enough apprentices going through?
There's been a significant increase in apprenticeship training. The challenge is keeping them.
Why?
And getting them into
the mining industry that's cannibalising it?
Yeah, the mining industry plays a pretty significant role. We're lucky now that the mining industry is contributing to the Construction Training Fund levy, which is important. Then that levy goes to subsidising apprenticeship costs and training within our industry. Previously, the mining sector had an exemption.
They're getting the freebies.
That's been removed now, so that's good. And
you guys are training them, and then they were taking them.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that we're pleased that that's occurred.
But still, it's probably a relationship there. It's a little bit tense because you sit across the table from each other. other, and they're stealing you guys.
Well, we all need workers. I mean, that's when there's generally a construction boom, there's generally a mining boom like we saw in 2014, and everyone's trying to put their best foot forward and run their operations. And that's really where the challenge we've had around I can understand, particularly from a public health perspective, around the hard border. And I think that there was a lot of debate around that. But what that did effectively in cases that we didn't have then the overseas migration, we didn't have the interstate migrations, and we're working off that low base of 15,000 starts in 2019. So when it peaked almost 12 months later, we were still working with the trade base off 15,000 and the workforce of 15,000 dwellings. If that makes sense. So that was part of that challenge.
So what's being done to fix that problem of our trade base, in addition to securing a larger trade base from overseas and interstate?
Yeah, well, fast-tracking visas are critical.
Is that happening?
Yeah, that's happening, right. So we want to see the overseas migration improve, but one of the challenges, as you can see in your operation, is where we're seeing with vacancy rates and we're seeing with housing supply. We don't have enough housing supply, and if we're going to reach the 200,000 homes across the country that we need to house the population, WA needs to be contributing at least 20,000 of that. Now, forecast this year is going to be probably sitting around the 15 to 16,000.
Well, we're not building enough, and we don't have enough people to even build that. Here's a cool stat for you. I don't even know if you've checked this before. In December 2022, we commenced about 990 houses. In December 1983, so 40 years ago, we commenced about 1,025. So 40 years ago, in the same month, we commenced more houses than we did 2 months ago. And we're struggling to even get those started.
Yep.
What is going on with the trade base in Western Australia? We clearly have not increased our trade base. 40 years ago, we had half the population.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors we've got to get right. We need title land supply. I think that's critical. The building and planning approvals process needs to be efficient so we can make sure approvals go through smoothly. We need to have the trade base to be able to construct the homes that we need to efficiently. Things will have to be aligned to be able to build the homes that we need to build. But we need to do it sustainably. We need to do it so builders have to be profitable, tradies have to be profitable, workers have to be paid. So the whole apprentices need to be retained. And the mental health side of our industry needs to be sustainable too. So yes, we've got to do all those things, but we've got to do it in a sustainable way. And get back to the issues with apprentices. Most apprentices in the construction industry will probably not continue their apprenticeship in the first or maybe second year. So there's a range of factors, whether the work's not what they expected or the relationship with the host isn't where that needs to be. But we need an industry that's going to help retain our apprentices and retain our contractors and workers in the sector. And we need to be a more diverse industry. We need to attract more women into our industry. We've got to.
Well, can we talk about that for a second? 2.5% of the construction industry are women. In the same way that the mining industry keeps stealing our people, can't we look into the predominantly female industries and look to try and grab a whole bunch of females to work? There's nothing a male bricklayer can do that a female couldn't do, or a male sparky. Why can't we attract more? Is it simply that females have more of a proclivity to people than things, and it's just really hard to get them interested in our sort of work?
Yeah, and I think it's not just females, but it's also making sure our diversity is there. It's our industry diversity. But I think
that's a huge untapped market of people, right? We're thinking about, well, look, we have a critical undersupply of skilled trades. Why aren't we advertising to the admin industry, the hairdressing industry, the nursing industry, God forbid, all these industries that are predominantly female, where they would do just as good, if not better, a job than a whole bunch of tradies we've got in the moment?
Yeah, and that's the role of the Construction Training Fund. And
they'd be paid better.
Absolutely. So Tiffany Allen's the CEO of the Construction Training Fund. We have a board member that sits on that fund that helps, I guess, provide input into the fund. But they do a great job in promoting the construction industry, and that's really effective. Their role. They've got programs that relate to the female football leagues and others. So they're out there really promoting the industry extremely well and hard. There's a Construction Future Centre in Belmont that they get kids in to show them the industry. So that's being done extremely well. And one of our challenges we've got really good apprenticeship commencements. Our challenge is around how do we keep them, and that's really where I get back to sustainability. In terms of the women's side, we have a program called Women Building Australia. Master Builders has had a program since 2009. There's a mentoring program as well, and at the moment we've got 18.1% of females in the construction industry, but they're very much around professional roles. We'd like to see that increase in the trade base, which I think is close to about 1%. So I think you're spot on in terms of what you're saying. We need to attract attract women into our industry, but we need an industry that's going to attract everyone that wants to be part of a diverse sector, and we need to put our best foot forward in there as an industry. And that's really why we're talking about sustainability, these reforms, better mental health. I sit on the Mates in Construction board that's a key leader in mental health within the construction industry, and they do an amazing job to help our workers within our sector. We need good mental health, we need diversity, but we need a sustainable industry going forward.
Let's talk about going forward. Will the price for construction of a residential house in 2023 be higher this year or lower this year than last year?
Could be similar, if not a bit lower, because I think prices are starting to ease a little bit.
Okay, where are they starting to ease?
At the front end, say bricklaying rates that were at one stage close to $350 a brick. As the market's softening, that front end of the housing market is starting to ease.
Yeah.
So some of those trade rates are starting to come back. As we're completing the stimulus work now that kicked off in 2020, we're starting to see the front end. At the start, there was concrete as bricklayers, those wet trades were in high demand. But now we're in almost those finishing trades areas. We're seeing roof carpentry rates go up a little bit more, obviously, a
roof
lot
sheeting.
more. So
roof plumbing.
Sheeting, plumbing, those areas. But those trades at the start of that building cycle are starting to normalise as the market starts to come off. And the master builders forecast that we're seeing that we've announced just recently is certainly a correction back to lower levels this year.
But nowhere near where they were in 2019?
Maybe a little bit higher.
Well, I would have thought so. I mean, back in 2019, I know builders were paying 85 cents a brick, right? So you said it got up to $350 for, I'm assuming, face brick. Surely we're not seeing brick prices go back to 85 cents.
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think they'll go back to pre-COVID levels or even to those levels. I don't think they'll get back there.
They're at 190, I heard already.
Yeah, and it all depends on you look back also the 350 a brick in that, there was a vaccine mandate in as well. So all bricklayers, effectively according to the law, had to be vaccinated.
So that would have taken a lot of
right, exactly. So you could see how the constraints in the industry and what the industry was dealing with.
But there's also a lot of supply factors here that we can't control and that have nothing to do at all with locals. As you said, timber, steel, these inputs are far more expensive now because of factors we can't control. Shipping, the war in Ukraine, that's not going away anytime soon.
No, it's not. And you look at every single state, including WA, was extremely busy with the home builder program. So everybody needed supply. From South Australia to Tasmania to Victoria, right across the board, everybody was busy. So the supply chain of timber, everyone was crying out for timber. Everyone was crying out for certain critical building materials. But WA in particular, we do rely on the interstate and overseas supply chains. There's not a lot that's manufactured within Western Australia. Timber is one, obviously through West Pine in WA, and Wesbeam, who are a LVL producer, and they supply laminated veneer lumber right across the country and into WA. But there's not too many local manufacturing components to the states. So we were relying heavily on state and national and overseas supply chains to supply the industry.
You represent a lot of apartment developers. They haven't started an apartment in over 7 months now across the whole state. What's going on?
The challenge there is a lot of the feasibilities aren't stacking up. There's certainly concerns around.
So you think that's the developer-led and not builder-led?
Yeah, well, I think what you find is also the builders in particular are very careful about engaging in contracts. Gets back to the start of what we were talking about, sustainable contracting, making sure that the contract's fair, there's a fair share of risk, and the procurement is around value rather than price. Where I think builders now, particularly commercial builders, are very much looking at the contracts really carefully to decide what they're going to engage in and not. Because if there's too much risk,
one job could kill them.
One job with not just cost escalation, but also liquidated damages. So it's a very tenuous situation now, and I think that the development industry and also the government as the lead developer need to really think hard about the type of contracts they're using and their procurement methodologies, and work with the industry. I mean, the builders want to build.
There's a question there for you. Will we see an apartment commencement before June 30?
That's a good question.
Hard to answer.
Hard to answer. I mean,
that's scary, isn't it?
It is. I mean, but with the one thing, you're right, Trent, we need housing supply. Yeah. We need development. If we're going to talk about overseas migration, we need housing. But we also need affordable housing. We need social housing. We need community housing.
We need people to build that housing.
That's right. And that's part of the challenge that we've got one of the biggest investments in social housing that Minister John Carey's been really trying to get up and running. There's been a commitment to social housing. One of the challenges has been, of course, is getting the builders builders to be able to do it. And I mentioned the natural disasters. I mean, that can't be overlooked either, because in WA we've seen the Wooroloo bushfires, we've seen Cyclone Saroja, we've seen Cyclone Ellie. All these communities have been devastated, but the industry is then being asked to engage to be part of the rebuild. And I've got members of mine that they're in Perth or even in Geraldton going up to help with Cyclone Ellie rebuild. We've been helping with Wooroloo, we've been helping with Saroja, with asbestos removal in those regions. So the industry's doing its work, and it's trying to help not just the consumer community, but it's also trying to help regional communities rebuild after these disasters. And getting back to say the housing side, government is really doing its best to try and increase social housing, but the industry has to be able to respond to that. And many builders have been obviously tied up doing the work since the stimulus was introduced, but also that they want to be part of that social housing rebuild, that community housing construction program. But I think also that the government need to be considerate in terms of the contracts that they offer and making sure that those cost escalation clauses are there, that the risk is shared, and they appreciate that we're still in effectively a pandemic in many ways, even though we're starting to ease, obviously, but we're still dealing with many of the issues. And I think from a building industry perspective, the fairer portion of risk needs to be there going forward, whether there's COVID or not. I think that's what's certainly spelled out for the industry, is that they have to be very careful around contracting to make sure that the risk is there and their business is protected.
When you look at land sales in Western Australia, in January of this year, we had just 22 land sales. That's something that makes me nervous when you compare it to a long run average of 500 sales per month. 22 were it, and back when the building grant was announced, it was over 1,000 in that month. So obviously a lot of that demand has been vacuumed forward, but we're now at a point, we spoke about cash flow, where a lot of the builds that these builders are finishing, all of them are costing the builder. So that last progress payment that comes in doesn't even come close to paying for the costs, right? So all of them are now banking losses on all of these builds. Most of the time, that in nearly a Ponzi scheme circumstance gets made up for by the next deposit that comes in for the next build, just to keep the cash flow going. But when there's no deposits coming in for the next build, because we've only had 22 land sales in 1 month, the cash flow really starts to dry up. Do you think we've seen the last of builder collapses? Are there any others you think are going to start falling over soon?
Well, look, I'm really concerned for the industry and what it's had to endure, and clearly said previously that it's the industry's been the meat and the sandwich in this. So the industry has been under stress for the last 2 years as it's tried to remain operational. So yeah, we're concerned about what the future might hold.
There might be some more.
Well, I hope not, Trent. I really do. And all we're doing is we're doing our best to try and work with the government to try and get them to consider things that might help support the industry, some sort of stabilisation support to help these builders that have just done their best to try and keep going. And you mentioned the community housing, the social housing side. Anything the state government do on those contracts, existing contracts, to help would go a long way to helping those builders get through the next period of time. We have conversations with our members trying to support them continually about what can we do to help them. And I know that there's stress in the market, not just from a metro perspective, but in regional Western Australia. So being part of the association is being part of that network that we help those members get through that period. But yeah, I think when you've seen the levels of cost escalation and you've seen the challenge around supply chain, I guess if we can just get through the next period of time and get a lot of that work completed, we hope that the future is a lot brighter in years to come. But that's the challenge that we've got ahead of us.
If I was Mark McGowan and you had 5 minutes with me right now, what would the one message you want to give him be?
I'd be saying to Mark, as we've said previously, is the building construction industry is a $30 billion sector, and we make such a large contribution to the state economy and training and workers and the multiplier effect. So anything that they can do in state government contracts to lead that process and adopt our 18 recommendations in full and legislate some of them would go a long way to stabilising the industry. And government contracts is for government to work hard to look at ways they can support those builders in those contracts, make sure they can get out sustainably and keep their businesses going, because they employ people, they employ West Australians, they employ subcontractors that employ West Australians. The supply chain, the multiplier effect, it helps the state, it helps the economy. We're all in this together, so let's try and help each other. That'd be my message. And I think that, to the Premier's credit, he has taken on board a lot of our feedback, a lot of our advice as the peak body, and a lot of the things he's introduced have helped. One of our our initiatives was a document that's been released by the regulator called Building a House in Challenging Times that the consumers can access, that demonstrates issues the industry's been under, but also what their rights are and what they can do to help deal with those issues. And we've been also saying to the public to be really kind and try and support as best they can the builder who is the meat and the sandwich, to be understanding and respectful. We understand it's a challenging time for them, but it's also a really challenging time for the builder and the stress that they're under. And as I've said, they're the meat and the sandwich, and they're doing the best they can under really trying circumstances. So it's not easy for anyone.
John Gelavis, Executive Director of the MBA, thank you so much for your stewardship. It's obviously been a really hard job for you in the last few years, but I think everyone appreciates your commitment to the role. And hopefully, in a year's time, we're talking about some clean, fresh air where prices have dropped a little bit, but sustainable enough for trades as well. And we've got a lot more confidence, consumer confidence in the industry to come back and ask for a new home to be built. Because right now, I think that is the one thing we're lacking is confidence going forward.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more. Confidence in our industry is critical, and I just want to acknowledge you for having me on the program and talking about the industry. And for any of our members listening, I just want to thank them for their ongoing support. And as the peak body, anybody who wants to be part of Master Builders, please join in the fight to help improve our industry. We can't do it on our own, and we need members to be able to support us on that journey. So thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!